So I'm going to read you this feedback that I received. She completely changed the way I approached my interviews. The feedback goes as follows. In the last 9 years, I have given around 50 interviews that have included full-time jobs, co-op jobs, part-time jobs. And these interviews were for a variety of different positions, and so this video should be applicable to a lot of people. This video is inspired from my last video about my unemployment series, and it seemed that people were really interested in that one particular part, and so I felt that expanding on that a little bit more would be helpful to a lot of people. So I will share the 5 things that I have learned in the last few years that will help tip the behavioral part of the interview in your favor. And no, these tips are not about sending a follow-up email to your manager after the interview. For each tip, I will share my exact interview experience and then an example question of how the interviewer can use to evaluate that particular quality. For people who like making notes to review after, I have summarized all the things that I will be talking about in this video on my website, and you can find the link in the description box below. In the summary, however, I have not gone into detail about my exact interview experience, so you may want to stick around if you are interested in that part as well. Timestamps will also be in the description box below, so you can just watch the part that interests you the most. I also want to add that I will probably not do this kind of video again just because I don't see my channel going in that direction. And I'm also not an expert in recruitment and HR. But from the response that I received from my last video, I felt that doing maybe one more would be good. So let's get into it. The behavioral part of an interview can be used to assess a lot of different things. It can be used to assess a candidate's personality to see if they would be a good fit for the environment and for the role. It can be used to assess your problem-solving capabilities. If you had a conflict at work, how would you deal with that? If you make any mistakes, how would you fix those mistakes? Stuff like that. So a behavioral part of an interview is really very important. And this, you could expect this to be the second or the third round of your interview. A lot of companies like doing this before the technical assessment just because technical skills can be learned over time. And so they want to see if they would actually like working with you before they go into the technical rounds. But then some companies like doing that before. So it can be the second or the third round of any interview process. The very first step is to be confident. When I initially started giving co-op interviews, I used to get really nervous, which was weird because normally I love talking to people and that part doesn't scare me. But there was something about the interview that would feel very high stake, and I felt that there was a lot to lose. And so I would get very nervous and I wouldn't perform that well. I wasn't myself, and that was a problem because if you are very nervous and you just can't talk, there is no way for the interviewer to find out who you really are, what your personality is, and if you would be a good fit for the role that you are interviewing for. So for my second co-op, I remember I had an interview with Facebook for a growth analyst position, and I wanted that job so bad. I thought it would look great on my resume because it was Facebook, the position was really good, and then in the future, I would get really awesome co-ops. But how great would it be to even work at Facebook, right? And so the interview was very high stakes for me. And I remember I walked in, I was shaking, I could barely say anything. I didn't remember any of the stuff that I had done in the past. And so it just felt like the person who had applied for the job was very different from the person who was actually interviewing for the job. And so obviously I didn't get that position because there was no way the interviewer could have had a chance to do a proper assessment whether I was a good candidate or not, because I just wasn't selling myself. For that interview, I was not being my authentic self and I did not show my true personality. I was just trying too hard to be perfect, even though I didn't know what perfect was for that role. So when you walk into an interview, don't think that it's a life and death situation, even if you want the job really bad. Just train your brain to think about it as a conversation you're going to have with a very curious friend. Remember that a job is a trade. You are trading your time and experience for money. You doing that job benefits both parties. In the current job environment, it may seem that the employer is doing you a favor by giving you a job, but don't think about it like that. If you are called in for an interview, that means the employer was attracted to your skills and they thought that you could potentially be an asset to their company. They're not interviewing you because they want to do a good deed and give you a job. They are doing it to benefit themselves. So when you think about a job being a trade, you go in knowing that you have skills skills that the employer wants, and that's going to give you some confidence. Another reason being confident is important is because it allows your brain to think clearly. And if you get questions that you don't know the answer for, you will be thinking clearly and you will be able to come up with a suitable enough response. The way an employer can check for this is A, by how you're talking to them and how you're communicating with them during the interview, but B, they can give you a question to throw you off. For example, in one of my interviews, I was asked to talk about my favorite animal and why that animal was my favorite. Now, this question completely threw me off because it was a data engineering question. What has my favorite animal got to do with data engineering? But I love horses and I love talking about horses. And because I was confident and I went into the interview thinking, okay, I'm going to talk to a friend. This is just a conversation. I know that I know that I will be good for the job. And so whatever happens, happens. I actually laughed when I was asked that question and I just went on to tell them why I loved horses. And I told them all the good qualities. They're majestic, but they're kind. I don't know, this is the stuff that I talked about, but I was able to answer that question just because I was confident in my abilities. And when I got a question that was completely unrelated, I was able to respond to that question. The second tip is to thoroughly read the job description before going into the interview and think of scenarios based on the job description. So whenever I'm prepping for an interview, because I have so much experience giving interviews, I don't really prep for the behavioral part as much anymore. But one thing I do is that I thoroughly read the job description and I think of scenarios that have happened in the past in my work that I could talk about. For example, in the description, if they have mentioned something about working with minimal supervision, in the interview, they could ask you to talk about a time where you were given a task and you did not get enough information and there was nobody around to help you. How did you complete that task? If they talk about working with a team, managing deadlines, they could ask you about conflict resolution, how in the past you had a conflict with a coworker and how you dealt with it. Because with deadlines and teamwork, there could be some issues with different teams. And so reading the job description can give you an idea about the possible questions that could be asked in the interview. The third tip is to show your curiosity. Employers appreciate candidates who are able to demonstrate their curiosity because it means that those people are likely to want a deeper understanding of the task at hand and won't be satisfied by simply checking items off a list. This also shows them that you will do whatever it takes to solve a problem and to understand the problem first. And the drive to wanting to understand the problem is a lot more appreciated than having the answers from day one. Now, I don't remember the question exactly, but in one of my front office interviews, I was given a question about weighing 2 balls. And apparently I gave the most common answer there was. So I was told that this was the answer that most people give, and there was only one person who was able to solve the question and give the right answer. Now, I was genuinely curious about what that answer was because only one person got it right, which meant that he was thinking outside the box, and I wanted to know how that person was thinking. And so I insisted and I told them that I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I didn't get that answer because it was true. I was really curious. And because I was confident, I was able to talk like that. I was able to communicate with them just like I would with a friend. They told me the answer, and at the end, I did get an offer for that position. It was just because they saw how curious I was. And I remember them telling me in the interviewer that I was the first person who had shown my curiosity and who was determined to get the right answer. And so I think that this quality is really important and it is something that employers really appreciate. The next tip is to understand the question before giving an answer. Asking your interviewer to repeat a question or getting clarification on the question that was asked is not a problem at all. Being in a rush to give answers has cost me a few jobs, and it was only when I really insisted on getting feedback was when I was told that I did not really answer the question that was being asked because I was in a rush to give that answer. So I'm going to read you this feedback that I received, and I love this person for giving me this feedback because she completely changed the way I approached my interviews. The feedback goes as follows. I think your experience and exposure is amazing, but you didn't really weave this experience into your responses. Your responses were pretty brief and needed more context, background, and/or examples. I would encourage you to also be intentional about responding to the questions. If you didn't fully understand the question, it's always okay to ask for clarification. This feedback was game-changing for me, and I really wish that more interviewers gave this feedback to the candidates. If any interviewers are watching this video, your feedback to people will not offend them, but it will just help them become better in their next interview. The next tip is basically a combination of everything that I've talked about, but it is the most important thing ever, and that is to improve your communication skills. I did a mathematics degree from the University of Waterloo, but what is funny is that our communication courses were mandatory. And this is because as part of the co-op program, we get to work in different companies, and the employers came back to Waterloo and were complaining that the students were able to make really technical models and they were able to solve a lot of problems, but they were not able to communicate their solution. And so when they left, the people in the company were not able to use their solution because they had no idea what they had built. And so for all math students, I think it was also true for engineering students, we all had to do communication courses because the employers were complaining that your students are really good at mathematics, but they cannot talk. So they are pretty much useless to us. And this was not just the case for math and engineering students. It was the case for almost all the faculties. And I know this because I used to work as a student ambassador. And so we would talk to different people. And so we were given training on what to tell people when they would ask about the different programs. And communication skills by far was the most important thing. You might not be very confident in your communication skills, but it is a skill, which means that it can be learned and it can be improved. So if you currently consider communication, oral or written, to be a weakness, you may want to start improving that. Again, I've summarized everything that I've talked about in this video, and you can find the link in the description box below. I will also become more consistent sending out my newsletters starting next quarter. So if you are interested, you can sign up on the same link below. Thank you for spending your precious time with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.